The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt of a quiet Texas road. The air was thick with heat, and the faint hum of cicadas filled the silence. Chuck Norris sat behind the wheel of his old beat-up truck, humming, along to a country song playing softly on the radio. His cowboy hat rested loosely on his head, and his weathered hands gripped the steering wheel with ease. He wasn't in any hurry. He never was. Life had taught him that rushing only led to mistakes. Chuck had spent most of the morning running errands for Linda, his wife of over 40 years. She'd sent him to pick up groceries, drop off a package at the post office, and grab a new set of tires for their lawnmower. It was a simple day, just like so many others they'd shared together. But as Chuck drove down the desolate stretch of highway, he noticed flashing red and blue lights in his rearview mirror. He slowed the truck to a stop on the shoulder of the road. Puzzled. He hadn't been speeding, or at least, he didn't think he had. Still, he turned off the engine and rolled down the window, waiting patiently as the officer approached. The man who appeared beside the truck was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a crisp uniform that seemed too stiff for the sweltering heat. His nameplate read Harper, and his face carried an expression of irritation mixed with something darker, something colder. "License and registration," Officer Greg Harper barked, leaning into the open window without so much as a greeting. His tone was sharp, almost hostile, and it caught Chuck off guard. Without saying a word, Chuck reached into the glove compartment and pulled out the requested documents. He handed them over calmly, meeting Harper's gaze with steady eyes. There was no trace of fear or defiance in his demeanor, just quiet confidence. That seemed to irritate Harper even more. "You were going 20 miles over the speed limit," Harper said, squinting at the papers in his hand. His voice dripped with accusation. Chuck frowned slightly. "I don't believe I was, officer. I've been driving carefully all morning." Harper snorted, shaking his head. "Don't try to play innocent with me. I clocked you myself." He tapped the radar gun clipped to his belt for emphasis, though there was something about the way he did it that felt rehearsed, almost theatrical. Chuck tilted his head slightly, studying the officer. Something about this situation didn't sit right with him. He'd lived in this town for decades and knew most of the local police by name. This was the first time he'd ever encountered Harper. And while Chuck couldn't put his finger on it, there was an unmistakable edge to the man, a simmering anger just beneath the surface. "I'm sure you're doing your job," Chuck replied evenly, choosing his words carefully. "But if you'll check again, I think you'll see I wasn't speeding." That comment lit a fuse inside Harper. His jaw tightened, and his grip on the clipboard shifted. "Are you calling me a liar?" he snapped, his voice rising. "No, sir," Chuck said, keeping his tone calm and respectful. "I'm just asking for a second look. Mistakes happen." For a moment, Harper stood frozen, staring at Chuck as if trying to decide whether to argue further. Then, without warning, he slammed the clipboard against the side of the truck, startling Chuck. "Listen here, buddy," Harper growled, leaning closer until his face was inches from Chuck's. "You may think you're some big shot around here, but let me tell you something. You're nothing. You hear me? Nothing." Chuck blinked, taken aback not by the insult but by the venom behind it. Harper's words weren't just angry. They were laced with contempt, the kind reserved for someone you truly despised. It was clear now. This wasn't about speeding. This was personal. Before Chuck could respond, Harper stepped back and unholstered his baton. The metallic clink echoed in the stillness of the afternoon. "Get out of the vehicle," Harper ordered, pointing the baton toward Chuck. Chuck hesitated, his mind racing. He didn't want trouble, but he also knew better than to blindly obey when things felt wrong. Slowly, deliberately, he unbuckled his seatbelt and opened the door. As he stepped out onto the pavement, he kept his movements smooth and deliberate, ensuring Harper wouldn't misinterpret anything as a threat. "What's this about?" Chuck asked, his voice steady despite the tension crackling in the air. Harper ignored the question. Instead, he jabbed the baton toward Chuck's chest. "You got a problem with authority? Huh? Is that it?" "No, sir," Chuck said, raising his hand slightly to show he meant no harm. "I respect authority, But I also expect fairness. The word fairness struck a nerve. Harper's face twisted with rage, and before Chuck could react, the officer swung the baton hard, striking him across the arm. Pain shot through Chuck's body, but he didn't flinch. Years of martial arts training had taught him how to absorb blows without losing focus. What shocked him more than the physical pain was the sheer audacity of the attack. "You think you're better than me?" Harper shouted, his voice trembling with fury. "Guys like you always think you're untouchable." Chuck stared at him, his expression unreadable. He didn't understand what Harper meant by "guys like you," but it was clear the officer's anger stemmed from something deeper than a routine traffic stop. Whatever it was, it had nothing to do with justice. From a distance, a young woman named Emily Dawson watched the scene unfold. She'd been walking her dog along the roadside when she noticed the police car pull over the truck. Curious, she paused to see what was happening. When Harper raised his baton, her heart sank. Without thinking, she pulled out her phone and started recording. As the seconds ticked by, the confrontation grew more intense. Harper continued shouting insults, each one uglier than the last, while Chuck remained silent, refusing to engage. Finally, Harper shoved Chuck back against the truck, pressing the baton against his throat. "Say something," Harper demanded, his breathing heavy. "Go ahead, make my day." Chuck looked him straight in the eye, his gaze unwavering. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. "This isn't who you are." Those words hit Harper like a punch to the gut. For a brief moment, his resolve wavered. But then he shook his head violently as if trying to shake off the doubt creeping into his mind. With one final shove, he stepped back and pointed the baton at Chuck. "Stay out of my town," he spat before turning on his heel and marching back to his patrol car. Chuck stood there for a moment, rubbing his sore arm. He glanced at Emily, who was still standing nearby, her phone lowered but her expression horrified. "Are you okay?" she asked timidly. Chuck nodded, offering her a small smile. "I'll be fine," he said. "Thank you for being here." As Harper sped away, leaving dust swirling in his wake, Chuck climbed back into his truck and took a deep breath. The encounter had rattled him, not because of the violence, but because of the hatred fueling it. He knew this wasn't over. Something told him this was just the beginning. By the time Chuck returned home, the sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The quiet hum of cicadas had given way to the chirping of crickets, signaling the shift from day to night. Linda was waiting for him on the porch, rocking gently in her favorite chair with a glass of lemonade in hand. She smiled as she saw his truck pull into the driveway, but her expression changed when she noticed the stiffness in his movements as he stepped out. "What happened?" she asked immediately, setting the glass down and standing up. Her voice carried both concern and curiosity. Chuck hesitated for a moment, unsure how to explain what had transpired. He didn't want to worry her, but he also knew Linda could tell when something was wrong. "Just a run-in with one of the local cops," he said finally, brushing off the dust from his jeans. "Nothing serious." Linda crossed her arms, clearly not convinced. "You're limping, Chuck. That doesn't sound like nothing serious. Tell me what happened." With a sigh, Chuck recounted the events of the traffic stop, leaving out no details. He described Officer Harper's hostility, the accusations, and the baton strike. As he spoke, Linda's face grew darker with each word. By the time he finished, her hands were clenched into fists at her sides. "That man sounds dangerous," she said firmly. "And racist. You can't let this slide, Chuck. People like that, they don't stop unless someone makes them." Chuck nodded slowly. He'd been thinking the same thing during the drive home, but part of him still hoped it would blow over. "I know," he admitted, "but I'm not looking for trouble. If I file a complaint or make a fuss, it'll only escalate things." Linda shook her head, stepping closer to place a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Sometimes doing the right thing means stepping into the fire," she said softly. "This isn't just about you, Chuck. It's about everyone else who might cross paths with that man. You have a chance to make a difference here." Her words struck a chord deep within him. Chuck had always believed in standing up for what was right, even if it came at a cost. He thought back to his days in the air, force where discipline and integrity weren't just ideals, they were ways of life. And now, decades later, those principles still guided him. The next morning, Chuck decided to visit the local police station to file an official complaint against Officer Harper. The building was modest, its brick exterior worn from years of weathering. Inside, the air conditioning buzzed loudly, providing a stark contrast to the oppressive heat outside. Chuck approached the front desk where a young receptionist greeted him with a polite smile. "I'd like to speak to someone about an incident involving one of your officers," Chuck said calmly, leaning slightly on the counter. The receptionist's smile faltered, but she quickly recovered. "Of course, sir. Let me get Detective Brooks for you. He handles citizen complaints." A few minutes later, a tall, broad-shouldered man with graying hair and a kind face emerged from a nearby office. He introduced himself as Detective Alan Brooks and gestured for Chuck to follow him. They settled into a small meeting room where Brooks listened intently as Chuck recounted the story once again. Unlike Harper, Brooks didn't interrupt or dismiss anything Chuck said. Instead, he took careful notes, occasionally nodding in understanding. "This is troubling," Brooks said after Chuck finished. "Officer Harper has had issues in the past. We've received complaints before, but nothing substantial enough to take action. Your account, however, paints a very different picture." Chuck leaned forward, his expression earnest. "也非常感谢您的耐心。以下是第二部分的声语内容." Chuck leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I'm not doing this for revenge," he explained. "I just want to make sure something like this doesn't happen again, to me or anyone else." Brooks nodded, clearly moved by Chuck's sincerity. "I'll look into it thoroughly," he promised. "But I won't lie to you. Rooting out corruption in our department isn't easy. Some people will protect their own no matter what." Before they could continue their conversation, the door burst open and Officer Harper stormed in. His face was red with anger, and his hands were balled into fists. "What's this about?" he demanded, glaring at Chuck. "You think you can come in here and ruin my career?" Chuck remained calm, his eyes steady. "I'm not trying to ruin anything," he replied. "I just want justice," Harper scoffed, taking a step closer. "Justice? You don't know the first thing about justice. Guys like you—" He cut himself off, sneering. "You think you're untouchable, but let me tell you something. You mess with me, and you'll regret it." Brooks stood up abruptly, placing himself between the two men. "That's enough, Harper," he said sharply. "You're out of line." Harper hesitated, his jaw tightening. For a moment, it looked like he might lash out, but then he turned on his heel and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. Once Harper was gone, Brooks sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. "I'm sorry about that," he said to Chuck. "He's difficult, but don't worry, I'll handle this." Chuck thanked him and left the station, feeling a mix of relief and unease. He knew filing the complaint was the right thing to do, but he also understood that Harper wouldn't let this go quietly. Later that evening, news of the altercation began spreading through town. Emily Dawson, the young woman who had recorded the incident, uploaded the video to social media. Within hours, it went viral. Comments poured in from all over the country, condemning Harper's actions and praising Chuck for his restraint. Local news outlets picked up the story, airing segments that highlighted Harper's history of misconduct and aggressive behavior. The attention put pressure on the police department to act. Chief Daniels, a stern but fair-minded man, called an emergency meeting with his officers. He addressed the growing outrage head-on, promising transparency and accountability. Behind closed doors, however, tensions ran high. Some officers defended Harper, claiming he was being unfairly targeted, while others agreed that his behavior had gone too far. Meanwhile, Harper seethed with anger. He felt betrayed by the system he believed should protect him. Sitting alone, in his apartment, he replayed the video of the traffic stop over and over, searching for flaws in Chuck's composure, but every time he found himself staring at the same unshakable calm that had infuriated him in the first place. "This isn't over." Harper muttered to himself, gripping the edge of his table. Not by a long shot. As the days passed, Chuck tried to return to his normal routine, but the weight of the situation lingered. Neighbors stopped by to offer support, sharing stories of their own encounters with Harper. Each tale added fuel to the fire, reinforcing Chuck's decision to speak out. One afternoon, as Chuck worked in his garden, Emily approached him timidly. She held her phone in one hand, nervously tapping the screen. "Mr. Norris," she began, "I wanted to thank you for everything. That videos, it's making a difference." Chuck straightened up, wiping dirt from his hands. He offered her a warm smile. "You're the one who deserves thanks," he said. "Without your courage, none of this would have come to light." Emily blushed, shaking her head. "Still, I feel like there's more we can do. This isn't just about Harper, it's about changing things for the better." Chuck nodded thoughtfully. "Change starts with standing up," he said. "But it grows when others join in." Their conversation ended with a shared sense of purpose. Emily left feeling inspired, determined to keep fighting for justice. Chuck, meanwhile, returned to his gardening, finding solace in the simple act of nurturing life from the soil. But even as he worked, he couldn't shake the feeling that Harper wasn't done. Not yet. Whatever came next, Chuck knew he had to be ready. Not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. Because sometimes, the hardest battles weren't fought with fists, but with hearts. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity for Chuck Norris. The video of the traffic stop had ignited a firestorm, and suddenly, everyone in town and beyond was talking about it. Supporters praised Chuck's calm demeanor and called for accountability, while critics dismissed the incident as an overreaction. Amid the chaos, Chuck remained grounded, focusing on what mattered most, ensuring that justice prevailed. Linda noticed the toll the situation was taking on him. Though Chuck rarely complained, she could see the tension in his shoulders and the quiet contemplation in his eyes. One morning, as they sat together at the kitchen table sipping coffee, she placed a hand on his arm. "You've done the right thing," she said softly. "But now you need to prepare yourself for whatever comes next." Chuck nodded, knowing she was right. He wasn't naive enough to think Harper would simply back down. Men like him didn't change easily. They doubled, down lashing out when cornered. If Harper decided to escalate things, Chuck needed to be ready, not just physically but mentally. That afternoon he headed out to his backyard, where an old wooden training dummy stood beneath the shade of a large oak tree. It had been years since he'd practiced martial arts regularly, but the skills he'd honed during his younger days were still sharp, buried deep within muscle memory. He started with basic stretches, loosening his muscles and clearing his mind. Then slowly he began moving through familiar forms, kicks, punches, blocks, all executed with precision and control. Word of Chuck's preparations spread quickly around town. Neighbors peeked over fences or stopped by to watch him train, marveling at his agility despite his age. Among them was Jake Miller, a high school football coach who lived 2 streets over. Jake had always admired Chuck from afar, respecting the way he carried himself with quiet dignity. Now, seeing him move with such grace and power, Jake felt compelled to approach. "Mind if I join you?" Jake asked one morning, stepping into the yard. He held up a pair of gloves, grinning sheepishly. "I figure you might need a sparring partner." Chuck paused mid-motion, lowering his arms. He studied Jake for a moment before nodding with a small smile. "Sure," he said. "But fair warning, I won't hold back." Jake laughed, tossing Chuck a pair of gloves. Wouldn't expect anything less. Over the next few weeks, the two men trained together every day. Jake brought a raw athleticism to their sessions, challenging Chuck in ways he hadn't anticipated. In return, Chuck taught him techniques rooted in discipline and patience, emphasizing the importance of balance and focus. Their workouts became a kind of therapy for both of them, a way to channel frustration into something productive. Emily Dawson also joined them occasionally, though her role was more observational than participatory. She filmed some of their training sessions, capturing moments of intensity and camaraderie. Her videos gained traction online, drawing even more attention to Chuck's story. People were inspired not only by his physical prowess, but also by his philosophy, strength without aggression, power tempered by compassion. As the days turned into weeks, Chuck transformed. His body grew leaner, his movements sharper. But the real change happened inside. Through meditation and reflection, he reinforced the values that had guided him throughout his life: humility, respect, and perseverance. Every punch, every kick, was a reminder of why he was doing this, not for revenge, but for justice. One evening, after a particularly grueling session, Jake collapsed onto the grass beside Chuck, breathing heavily. "You know," he said between gasps, "I never realized how much mental toughness goes into this stuff. I thought it was all about brute force." Chuck chuckled, wiping sweat from his brow. "Brute force will get you so far," he replied. "But true strength comes from here." He tapped his chest lightly, indicating his heart. "And here," he pointed to his head. "It's about knowing yourself and your opponent." Jake nodded, absorbing the lesson. "So, what's the plan? Are you going to face Harper again?" Chuck's expression darkened slightly. "If it comes to that," he said simply. "But I'm hoping it doesn't. Sometimes the best fights are the ones you avoid." Despite his words, Chuck knew the odds of avoiding Harper were slim. The officer had grown increasingly erratic since the video went viral, lashing out at colleagues and making veiled threats against Chuck. Rumors circulated that he was planning something big, something designed to humiliate Chuck publicly and reclaim his authority. Detective Alan Brooks kept Chuck informed about developments within the department. Harper's behavior had become untenable, and Chief Daniels was under immense pressure to act. An internal investigation was underway, but progress was slow. Brooks confided in Chuck that Harper was digging in his heels, refusing to admit wrongdoing. "He's dangerous," Brooks warned during one of their meetings. "He feels cornered, and when people like him feel cornered, they lash out. Be careful, Chuck." Chuck appreciated the concern, but didn't let it deter him. Instead, he redoubled his efforts, spending hours each day refining his technique and strengthening his resolve. Linda watched from the porch, sometimes bringing him water or snacks, silently supporting him in her own way. One day, Emily approached Chuck with an idea. "What if we organized a community event?" she suggested excitedly. "Something that brings everyone together, a chance to show support for you and send a message about standing up to injustice." Chuck considered the proposal thoughtfully. While he wasn't fond of drawing attention to himself, he recognized the value of uniting the community. Together, they planned a peaceful gathering at the local park. Flyers went up around town, inviting residents to come and hear speeches, share stories, and celebrate resilience. On the day of the event, the park was packed with people of all ages and backgrounds. Families spread blankets on the grass, children played nearby, and local musicians provided a lively soundtrack. When Chuck stepped up to speak, the crowd fell silent, hanging on his every word. "I'm not here to talk about myself," he began, his voice steady and clear. "I'm here to remind us all of something important. We have the power to shape our world. Each of us has a choice: to stand by and watch injustice unfold, or to step up and say, 'Enough.' Today, I ask you to choose courage. Choose kindness. Choose unity." The applause that followed was thunderous, echoing across the park. For a brief moment, Chuck allowed himself to feel hope, not just for himself, but for the future of the community. Unbeknownst to him, Harper watched the event. From a distance, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. Fury burned in his eyes as he listened to Chuck's words, feeling mocked and exposed. As the crowd dispersed, Harper muttered under his breath, "This isn't over, Norris. Not by a long shot." Though tensions simmered beneath the surface, Chuck returned home that night feeling lighter than he had in weeks. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, he felt truly prepared, not just to face Harper, but to inspire others to do the same. The challenge came sooner than anyone expected. 2 days after the community event, a letter arrived at Chuck's house. It was typed, unsigned, and brief. "Meet me at the gym tomorrow night if you've got the guts. Let's settle this once and for all." There was no mistaking who it was from. Officer Greg Harper had made his move. Chuck read the note aloud to Linda, who frowned deeply. "This is exactly what he wants," she said, crossing her arms. "He's trying to provoke you into something reckless." "I know," Chuck replied, setting the paper down on the kitchen table. "But I can't ignore it either. If I don't show up, he'll twist it into proof that I'm weak or afraid. And worse, he might use it as an excuse to hurt someone else." Linda sighed, knowing he was right but hating the risk. "Just promise me you'll be careful," she said finally. "This man isn't playing fair." Chuck nodded. "I won't let him drag me down to his level. Whatever happens, I'll stay true to myself." Word of the impending showdown spread quickly through town. Emily Dawson posted about it online, warning people not to escalate the situation, but acknowledging that many were curious. By the time evening fell, the local gymnasium was packed with spectators, friends, neighbors, reporters, and even a few out-of-towners eager to witness what promised to be a spectacle. Inside the gym, the atmosphere was electric. Folding chairs lined the edges of the room, leaving a large open space in the center where 2 mats had been laid out. A makeshift ring, marked by ropes strung between posts, added a sense of formality to the event. The crowd buzzed with anticipation, some cheering for Chuck, others muttering doubts about whether a middle-aged man could hold his own against a younger, stronger opponent. Harper arrived first, swaggering into the gym like a boxer entering the ring. He wore a sleeveless shirt that showed off his muscular arms and carried himself with an air of arrogance. His eyes scanned the crowd, lingering on those who dared to meet his gaze. When he spotted Chuck walking in calmly from the opposite side, Harper sneered. "Thought you'd chicken out," Harper called out loud enough for everyone to hear. "Guess you're dumber than you look." Chuck ignored the jab, focusing instead on the task ahead. He wore simple workout clothes, a plain t-shirt and loose-fitting pants, and carried no visible signs of nerves. As he stepped onto the mat, the noise in the room quieted slightly, replaced by a tense silence. Detective Alan Brooks stood nearby, acting as an unofficial referee. He raised his hands to signal for attention. "Let's keep this clean," he announced firmly. "No cheap shots, no foul play. This is about settling things, not making them worse." Harper rolled his eyes but nodded reluctantly. Chuck gave a single respectful bow toward Harper, then turned to face the crowd. For a moment he locked eyes with Emily, Jake, and Linda, drawing strength from their unwavering support. Then, without another word, the match began. From the start, Harper charged forward with brute force, swinging wildly with punches aimed at Chuck's head and torso. But Chuck moved with precision, dodging each attack effortlessly. His movements were fluid, almost dance-like, as he sidestepped Harper's advances and countered with quick, controlled strikes. Each blow landed with purpose, not meant to injure, but to demonstrate skill and restraint. Frustration mounted in Harper's expression as his attacks repeatedly missed their mark. He threw himself into another flurry of punches, only to find himself stumbling past Chuck and crashing to the mat. The crowd gasped, followed by scattered applause. Harper scrambled to his feet, red-faced and seething. "You think this is funny?" Harper shouted, pointing a finger at Chuck. "You're just showing off." Chuck didn't respond. Instead, he remained calm, waiting patiently for Harper's next move. This infuriated Harper even more. He lunged again, this time attempting a low kick aimed at Chuck's legs. Anticipating the maneuver, Chuck pivoted smoothly, using Harper's momentum against him. With a swift motion, he swept Harper's leg out from under him, sending the officer sprawling once more. By now, the audience was fully engaged, reacting to every exchange with cheers or groans. Some clapped rhythmically, urging Chuck on, while others muttered disapproval of Harper's increasingly desperate tactics. Even Chief Daniels, who had shown up reluctantly, watched with growing unease as his officer resorted to dirty tricks, elbowing, grabbing, and even spitting insults mid-fight. Despite Harper's aggression, Chuck never lost his composure. Every strike he delivered was measured, every block executed with care. When Harper tried to tackle him to the ground, Chuck caught him mid-motion and flipped him over gently, ensuring he landed safely. It was as if he were teaching a lesson, not just to Harper, but to everyone watching, that strength wasn't about domination. It was about control. Finally, Harper reached his breaking point. Blinded by rage, he grabbed the edge of the mat and yanked it upward, causing both men to lose their footing. They tumbled to the floor together in a chaotic heap. Harper scrambled on top of Chuck, raining down blows with reckless abandon. But Chuck, ever the strategist, waited for the perfect moment to act. With a sudden burst of energy, he twisted free, pinning Harper face down with one arm pressed firmly against his back. The room fell silent. Harper struggled beneath Chuck's grip, but it was futile. Slowly, Chuck eased up, allowing Harper to roll onto his side and catch his breath. For the first time, there was no anger in Chuck's eyes, only compassion. "It doesn't have to be this way," Chuck said softly, offering Harper a hand to help him up. "You're better than this." For a long moment, Harper hesitated, staring at Chuck's outstretched hand. Tears welled in his eyes, not of pain, but of shame. Finally, with a trembling sigh, he accepted the gesture and allowed Chuck to pull him to his feet. The crowd erupted into applause, though it wasn't celebratory. It was a collective acknowledgement of the humanity displayed in that final act of forgiveness. Harper stood there, defeated but not broken, as Chuck patted him lightly on the shoulder before stepping away. As the gym emptied, Detective Brooks approached Harper, his expression stern but not unkind. "We need to talk," he said simply. Harper nodded, too exhausted to argue. Later that night, Chuck returned home to find Linda waiting on the porch. She embraced him tightly, tears streaming down her face. "You did it," she whispered. "You showed them what real strength looks like." Chuck shook his head modestly. "No," he corrected her. "We did it. Everyone who stood with me today, they're the ones who made the difference." And as they sat together under the stars, listening to the distant hum of crickets, Chuck felt a profound sense of peace. The battle may have been won, but the war against hatred and injustice would continue. Still, he knew one thing for certain. Change was possible, especially when people chose to stand together. The days following the showdown at the gym were a blur of activity and reflection. Officer Greg Harper, once known for his arrogance and aggression, found himself stripped of his badge and suspended indefinitely pending an internal investigation. The footage of the match, recorded by Emily Dawson and shared widely online, had left little room for excuses or cover-ups. Chief Daniels, under immense public pressure, vowed transparency, promising that justice would be served. Harper's fall from grace was swift and brutal. Stripped of the authority he had once wielded so recklessly, he retreated into isolation. His apartment became a sanctuary of shame and self-loathing. Days turned into weeks, and Harper spent much of his time staring blankly at the walls, replaying the events of the match in his mind. Chuck's final words echoed in his thoughts. "You're better than this." At first, Harper dismissed them as mockery, but over time, they began to take root deeper within him, gnawing at his conscience. Detective Alan Brooks visited Harper periodically, not out of obligation but out of genuine concern. He knew men like Harper, broken, bitter, and dangerous if left unchecked, but he also believed in redemption. During one of their conversations, Brooks handed Harper a stack of books on conflict resolution and emotional intelligence. "It's not too late to change," Brooks said firmly, "but you've got to want it." At first, Harper resisted. He saw no future for himself beyond the wreckage of his career. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, something shifted. He began reading the books Brooks had given him, finding solace in stories of others who had faced similar struggles. He started attending community meetings at local centers, though initially he did so reluctantly. At these gatherings, he listened, quietly as people shared their experiences with prejudice and injustice. For the first time in years, Harper felt a flicker of empathy, a fragile but growing awareness of the harm he had caused. Meanwhile, Chuck Norris returned to his quiet life. Though he remained a symbol of resilience and integrity, neighbors stopped by regularly to thank him, sharing how his actions had inspired them to stand up against injustice in their own lives. Linda often teased him about becoming a celebrity, but Chuck brushed it off with his usual humility. "I'm just a man trying to do the right thing," he would say with a smile. Nothing more, nothing less. Chuck continued training every morning, though now he welcomed others to join him. Jake Miller brought some of his football players, eager to teach them discipline alongside athleticism. Emily Dawson filmed snippets of their sessions, posting videos online that emphasized the importance of respect and compassion. Together they created a ripple effect, spreading positivity throughout the community. One evening, as Chuck sat on his porch watching the sunset, Emily approached him with gratitude shining in her eyes. She held a small notebook filled with handwritten notes and sketches, ideas for projects she hoped to launch to promote peace and understanding. "You didn't just teach Harper a lesson," she said softly. "You taught all of us." Chuck smiled, tipping his hat slightly. "Sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought with fists, but with hearts," he replied. It was a phrase he had repeated often since the match, one that seemed to resonate deeply with those around him. As autumn settled over the town, signs of change became evident everywhere. Community leaders organized workshops on racial sensitivity and conflict de-escalation, drawing large crowds eager to learn and grow. Local schools introduced programs focused on kindness and inclusivity, inspired by Chuck's example. Even Chief Daniels implemented new policies aimed at fostering accountability and trust within the police department. Harper, too, began making amends in his own way. Guided by Detective Brooks, he volunteered at youth outreach programs, mentoring troubled teens and sharing cautionary tales from his past. Though he still carried the weight of his mistakes, he found purpose in helping others avoid the same pitfalls. Over time, the hostility many had once felt toward him softened, replaced by cautious optimism. One crisp Saturday afternoon, Harper attended a community picnic hosted by none other than Chuck Norris. The event was designed to bring people together, to celebrate unity and healing. Harper hesitated at the entrance, unsure whether he would be welcomed, but when Chuck spotted him, he waved warmly, inviting him inside. "You showed courage by coming here today," Chuck said as they shook hands. "That takes strength." Harper nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "I owe you an apology," he admitted. "For everything." Chuck placed a hand on Harper's shoulder, his expression kind. "Apologies are a start," he said gently. "But true change comes from action. Keep doing what you're doing and you'll make things right, not just for yourself but for everyone." Tears welled in Harper's eyes, but they weren't tears of regret this time. They were tears of hope. For the first time in years, he felt like he was moving forward rather than being dragged down by his past. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the gathering, laughter and conversation filled the air. People mingled freely, sharing food, stories, and dreams for the future. Among them stood Chuck Norris, not as a legend or a hero, but as a man who had chosen compassion over anger, forgiveness over vengeance. Linda joined him by the grill, handing him a plate piled high with burgers and corn on the cob. "You've done good, Chuck," she said, her voice filled with pride. "Real good," Chuck chuckled, taking the plate with a nod. "We've all done good," he corrected her, "and we'll keep doing good for as long as it takes." In that moment, surrounded by friends and neighbors, Chuck understood something profound. Justice wasn't a destination, it was a journey fueled by courage, guided by empathy, and sustained by hope. And though challenges undoubtedly lay ahead, he knew the community was stronger now, ready to face whatever came next, together.